Hi everyone, welcome to episode 2 of IT Uninterrupted. We'll give it a couple of minutes to let everyone join, then we'll get started. All right, let's get started. Thanks for joining us for Intro to APIs with Postman, which is episode number 2 in our thought leadership series, IT Uninterrupted. My name is Nate Gagny, and I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Wes Carroll, Senior Systems Engineer with Zerto, who will be discussing APIs with you today. Over to you, Wes.
Thanks for that introduction, Nate. Really do appreciate it. So getting started with our presentation here on Intro to APIs with Postman, we are going to go over the following agenda. We're going to kick it off by talking about APIs and what are they. We're going to then move into Postman and what is it, and then a live demo including where to get Postman and how to get started using it. So what is an API? API literally stands for Application Programming Interface. The definition is programming simplification by abstracting underlying implementation and only exposing objects or actions the developer needs. Essentially what that translates to is I ask a program for something and it gives something back to me. It gives me back a response that I can then work with. So what can you do with an API? What is an API good for? Well, not all APIs follow this, but the majority of the APIs that we are going to be working with follow the CRUD model. CRUD essentially stands for create, request, update, and delete. Uh, this is a very familiar model in most computing paradigms, right? Where you're doing something with data. You're creating it. You need to get that data or request that data. You need to update that data, or we're done with that data. We're going to go ahead and delete it. As we look at that CRUD model, we're going to start to translate this into API and API terminology. Um, Typically, and I highly recommend that you read the documents for all the different APIs that you're going to look at. But when you think about creating data, it's going to be a post method with the APIs. If you're going to request data, gather data from somewhere, that's a get method. Update data is a put, right? That data already exists, but we need to update it somehow. That's going to be a put, and we want to delete data. That is going to be a delete method. We actually work with APIs today without really knowing it in websites and whatnot, but our browser isn't really designed to allow us to interact with it on a programmatic level, right? Most of the stuff that we're doing is it's GET requests, right? Type in a website URL and you're going to get that data. Submit a form, that is going to be a POST request, right? But that's all abstracted away from us. We don't really need to worry about it. Um, as we start working with APIs, we need to think about the actions that we're doing and associate those with methods. Now, this is just a subset of methods to get us started, and these, in my opinion, are going to be the most common ones that we will be using as we continue down our API journey. So there are several different types of APIs. Um, there's a SOAP API, and SOAP stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. One of the constraints of this API is that it is XML only. We'll define XML here in a second, but just understand that XML it's restricted to using that response type and that declaration type. REST is representational state transfer, and that's a different. What I find is the majority of the APIs that I work with are REST. And it gives us our choice in language that we want to use, either XML or JSON. And again, we'll define JSON here in a second, but this is what you're going to hear a lot. It's a REST-based API using JSON, or it's a REST API using XML. Um, so no matter what language of choice you want to work with, a lot of the APIs will give you that choice. Some of them are going to dictate JSON just because of the server structure behind, or some of them are going to dictate XML. Again, refer to the API documentation to really understand the language that you're going to be working with, and if it is XML or JSON based. And then we have GraphQL. GraphQL is a graph query language. This is a query-based request response API to only gather the information that you need. Um, this is relatively new in the history of APIs, um, and we are seeing more and more APIs start to embrace this. There are APIs out there that will use a mix depending on what it is that you are trying to accomplish. So some will use REST and Graph, or different combinations in order to provide the users the experience that they're looking for. So I talked about this earlier. What? XML. XML is a markup language that defines a set of rules for encoding documents in a format that is both human readable and machine readable. So that is the definition of XML. Personally, I find XML a little bit tedious to work with. I prefer JSON, and we'll talk about JSON here in a second. But XML if you've ever looked at an HTML document, XML is more defined along those lines, where you have tags, opening tags and closing tags in order to define what that document looks like. JSON, though, JSON is a syntax for storing and exchanging data. JSON is a little bit different than XML. You don't have the opening and closing tags, but it is a very strongly formatted document. JSON's got rules about the formatting of a document in order to create that hierarchy, where in XML it's tag based, in JSON it's more formatting based. So it makes heavy use of curly braces and square brackets in order to define the different definitions of the data throughout the document. And then finally, what is Postman? Uh, Postman is a fantastic tool that allows you to do so much. It allows you to do everything from automated testing to design and mocking of APIs if you wanted to create APIs. It allows for creating documentation around APIs, API monitoring. But the one that we really care about, the one that we are going to use as we start our foray into the world of APIs, is the API client. This is going to allow us to create and execute any REST, SOAP, or GraphQL query from directly within Postman. And then the other thing that it does is it provides workspaces. These workspaces can be useful for separating different environments that you're working with. They can be useful for collaboration across different work groups. Sharing a single workspace within a set of sysadmins or DevOps folks who have a common goal or a common platform that they're working on is a great way to keep up with everybody and what they're doing. So with that, that concludes the slide portion of this, and we are going to go ahead and jump right in to our demo. Let me go ahead and bring up my browser. Fantastic. The first thing that we're going to need to do is download and install Postman. My favorite method of doing that is using a package manager. Outside of using a package manager that has Postman as a supported package, you can navigate to www.postman.com, and it's going to land you on this landing page. This is a great resource for all the different things that Postman can do. And once you're here, if you scroll down a little bit, you see an overview of what is Postman And what we're interested today is this API client portion. You can do a lot of different things with it, but at this point, we really don't care. We're just are here to download Postman. So what we do is we click on the download button, and it's going to take us to this web page, detect your OS, and serve the appropriate binaries. You can go ahead and download those, and if you need to download it for another OS, you have that ability right down here. And once you've done that, you're just going to run through a normal installation procedure. The installation is very straightforward, it's very easy, and then go ahead and launch Postman for the first time. When you launch it for the first time, it's going to ask you to either create an account or sign in. This account is going to allow you to replicate all of your different calls, all of your different settings between environments. I run on a lot of different virtual servers. I run on a lot of different physical boxes and whatnot. And the ability to have all of my calls in an environment where all I have to do is download and install Postman and log in is invaluable to me. I'm not having to copy paste. I'm not handcuffed to one location. So I highly recommend doing it. It's going to save you a lot of work, time, and effort in the long run. Once you have installed and signed in, you're going to be presented with a dashboard that looks like this. My dashboard is going to look a little different because I do have a few collections going on, but this is pretty much just the starting page where you can get started with, you can dive right in and create a request. You click on that button, it's going to open up a new tab, and you can just start typing. We're not going to do that just yet, but you get the idea. Over on the right-hand side, we have some learning resources, work smarter with Postman, different tutorials. We have the release notes over here. And then over here on the left-hand side, we have our customization. If I wanted to go into dark mode, I could click on that, and now I'm in dark mode. If I wanted to get rid of the launchpad, I can do that as well. And I have more settings. This is one of the things that I recommend you click on the first time. Poke around, understand what's in here, but I wanted to draw your attention to this SSL certificate verification. You'll notice in my environment it's off. The reason it's off is because I work with a lot of self-signed certs. When you're dealing with self-signed certs and it can't validate that certificate chain, it's going to throw an error. So if you do work with a lot of self-signed certs, you're going to want to go ahead and turn that off. Otherwise, you can leave it on, and it should function no problem, but if you run into an error, you might want to check and make sure it's not an SSL validation error. There are a lot of other settings that you have within here on the general page alone, as well as different themes. So I can go, like I said, light or dark, shortcuts, data, just a lot of different things that I recommend you kind of poke around, figure out what's good for you, and then go ahead and jump in. So now that we have Postman installed, we have it open, and we are working towards creating our first request, we need to find an API that we can work with. If you don't have an API available, don't worry. I've got a few examples that we can go ahead and start to see some examples for. So the first one that we're going to look at is this one called Kayne REST. Go ahead and navigate out to KayneREST.com, and this is Kayne as a service. Free REST API for random Kanye West quotes. You can see in the example here, the documentation is really straightforward. There's not a whole lot here that we need to understand in order to make our first API request. We see here that it needs a GET method, and then we see the URI right next to it, https://api.kanye.rest. It doesn't explicitly call it out, but one of the items to understand when I'm looking at this is an example return, so what we expect to get back. Those curly braces along with the colon here kind of let me know that I should expect a JSON response. So once I have this information, I can open up my Postman, and I actually have it pre-populated here, so I've got something saved. we see it's already doing a get. If I had a different method, I could just click that arrow, select the method that I needed. For us, get is going to be fine. I have my HTTPS, and once I've got that ready to go, all I have to do is click that send button. So I send it out and I get a response. We've got some information that's come back. The status over here on the right-hand side tells me that it was a 200 response. Okay, that's what we're looking for. That's great. How long did it take? So this lets me know exactly where my latency is. At this point, we can see that the biggest problem here was at the transfer start, but a quarter of a second, that's really good. How much data came back and details about that. I also have here the body. Now this recognizes that this is JSON format. If I wanted to change it to a text, I could change it to text, but because we are working with JSON, I wanted to make it look pretty. It highlights it, makes it a little easier to read. And then I've got my data here. So my quote that has been returned is, fur pillows are hard to sleep on, actually. Well, I got that wrong, but you guys got it, right? I got my data back. That's fantastic. Coming across this bar here, I can see that I have a cookie that was returned. So I get a cookie that is underscore CFDUID with a value. If I'm ever interested in my cookies, I can always take a look at them, but don't really need to here. I have my headers. So these are all the different headers that were returned back along with my payload or my data. And one of the ones that I'm interested in here is this content type. So Postman sees this content type and it attempts to take that body and format it in a way that makes sense. So this happens to be JSON. Fantastic. That's great. More data that I have down here. If I'm interested in it, I can look at it. I'm not really interested. I don't really care. And then the final thing here is the test results. So we haven't written any tests. We're not going to worry too much about it just yet. But if you wanted to see your test results, you could see them there. So if I go back and I look at my Kanye.rest website, I'll see in the bottom under the return values, I've got this little extra thing here, and I have this question mark format equals text. So with URLs, anything after a question mark is a query parameter. And what this is telling me is I've got the ability to send a query parameter called format, that is the key, and send the value of text. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And once I've copied that, I will paste that to the end of my URI. And something just happened when I pasted that in there. The params item underneath the URI, it got filled in. And you'll notice that automatically we have this key that was added and the value. So if I didn't want to paste that in there, it looks like I could fill this in and then it would build the URI. We'll test that hypothesis here in a few minutes. So now that I've got that there, I can go ahead and send the request again, and I send it out there and I get back just the world is our office. I don't get that quote identifier, I don't get the curly braces, I don't get anything like that. And not only that, but I see here that the data is formatted as text. If I look at my headers, I can see my content type is text plain. So the Postman program has automatically changed the way that the data is displayed just based on the way that the content type is being returned, that data that we get back. That's fantastic. So we're now using APIs, right? It's as simple as that. But this is a little limiting, right? There's not a whole lot that we can do with it, and I've pretty much shown you the extent of this API. So let's find something a little bit more difficult, shall we? The next API that we are going to look at is something that is quite popular with my colleagues, and it is called catfact.ninja. So this is a Fax API. We can see here we've got the base URL and at catfact.ninja, and this API provides endpoints to get random cat facts. Fantastic. You may have come across similar implementations or API documentation that looks like this. And this is known as either Swagger or the Open API spec. This implementation is really fantastic because it allows you to actually explore interactively the API right in your browser. For example, I can click on this get breeds. I can see the documentation. This returns a list of breeds, any parameters. So I've got a query integer called limit, and it limits the number of results, maxes 1,000 per page. I've got a default value of 1. Further down, it allows me to understand the responses that I could get, and so I've got my responses along with my response content type. So this is the content types that the API is going to allow me to request. In this case, we've got JSON. If I click it, that's the only one I have. That'll be fine for what we're doing and what we're looking for. And then I've got my example values. These are pieces of data that is going to be returned by interacting with this API. So I've got my breed, I've got my country, I've got my origin, code, and pattern, and those are all strings. Great information. If I want to interact with it and try it out right here in the browser, I have that ability by clicking this try it out button. That is going to allow me to manipulate these fields, and let's say I want 3 results per page, and then just click the execute. The page is going to update with the responses that I get along with the curl command that was used in order to generate the results. We can also see the request URL, so I'm going to copy that for use here in a second, but it allows us to see exactly what it's calling. So there is no question about, oh, what was the query parameter, what happened? No, this is what it used in order to generate this data. So I can see some metadata information. So I've got my current page, I've got my data, the data that we expected based on the model. So we've got, this American curl is from the United States. It's a mutation. It could be short, might be long, who knows? And it's got all sorts of patterns. And it also returns this other metadata around the different pages that we can use and whatnot. We're not going to worry about that right now, but just understand that this data could be returned along with the different response headers that we have that we can have expected to return. So that's great, but I can't share this. There's no way for me to save it and share it with a team or keep it for use down the road. So I'm going to open up Postman, and I've got Fax as a service teed up and ready to go, but I want to go ahead and paste in my URL that it showed me it used. Again, you can see params is automatically populated. I've got my limit value, and I'm going to click send. I click send, and that data is brought back. I get back the same data that was used in the Swagger API. We can see we've got our American curl, we've got the first page, last page, all that other information. It's JSON, and then again the headers, they're just located in a different location. I can come back here, I can look at this, and we're good to go. So that's great, but that API provides a lot of different information. So let's go back and let's explore it a little bit more. This allows us to see the breeds. Great. What about this one here, this fact? It returns a random fact. That sounds pretty good. So here I can see it's the endpoint is /fact. It's a GET request, and now I've got this max length. That's a little interesting. So if I look at this, it limits the length of the facts returned. Why would I want to limit the length of the facts returned? Well, maybe the field that you're populating may have a character limit. Like let's take, for example, Twitter. Twitter lets you have at most 280 characters. So if I want to try this out, and I want to make sure that I'm going to get a fact that can fit in a Twitter feed, I can put 280 and then execute it. In this case, it again shows me the curl command, shows me the request URL. We didn't look at what should be expected, but we get this information. We get the fact, as well as the link. So this is 198 characters. If I want to take this fact, copy it, paste it into Twitter, I could, or I could do it programmatically. Either way, lets you know, again, the header information that came back and the successful operation. If we look at the facts, this is a different mutation of the fact one where I can get multiple facts with multiple lengths. So again, if I try it out, let's say I want 10 facts, but I want to make sure that they all fit within Twitter. I can fill in that information, I can execute it, and it lets me know that I got 10 facts, max length 280, and again, each one of these is a different cat fact, all making sure that it's 280 or less. Once again, I can copy this out. I can go back to Postman. I can populate it. And when we populate it, look at the params. Keep an eye on this section. It went ahead and it updated my query string. So limit, max length, 10, and 280 respectively. Now I can change this on the fly. I can either change it by clicking up here in the URI, or I can change it in this value. So let's say this time I only want 3 back, and I want to use old school Twitter, and I want to make sure it's 140 or less. I update those fields, and we look here in our URI. This is updated. Perfect. We'll go ahead and click send, and this time I get 3 facts. And the metadata again, each one is respecting my length of 140, which is perfect, and no cookies, headers, I could look at those, but for us, that looks fantastic. This is really the majority of what you are probably going to be doing with APIs, but not all APIs allow you to just freely go in and take a look. Some APIs require you to sign up and either pass a username and password or a token. We're going to look at those 2 examples next. So if we take a look at this OMDB API, OMDB is the Open Movie Database. In order to interact with this, when you look at their documentation, so omdbapi.com, you'll notice that this usage, it's using a query string to pass an API key. This is something that a lot of different sites use. You actually have to pass your API key in order to authenticate as part of a query string. It's fine. We will be able to do that no problem. But in order to do it, we need an API key, right? We've already seen how to pass that data in the params, but we need this API key. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on API, we're going to sign up, and we're going to get an API key. I've already done this ahead of time, so next what we need to do is we need to figure out what else do we need to do in order to use this API. So we'll see parameters. Now we can get by ID or title, and this allows us, this documents in a slightly different way, but it allows us to either search for a valid IMDb ID, and it gives us an example here, or a movie title to search for. Some other information, types, years, do I want the plot back? Do I want it short or full? How do I want it back? JSON or XML? Oh, this is cool. So if I want it as XML, I could state that I need XML, but it shows our default value here is JSON, and as well as the plot, the default value is short. We're going to remember that here as we look next. The other option that I have is to just search, right? And use this parameter, S, to a movie title to search for. You'll notice there's no plot coming back. There is no data, but again, I can get JSON or I can get XML. How many pages, 1, 2, or what page number, I'm sorry, not how many pages. The default is going to be 1. Perfect. So if we come back here and we look at Postman, we will take a look at the OMDB API that I have here. So we know it's that. And if we look back, we'll see that it needs API key equals our key. That's great. So what I do is I fill in API key in the query parameters and then my key, but I don't want my key to be visible to you guys. I mean, I know you hackers out there, you go and look at my key and then you're going to go use it for your own resources. Well, this is where these environments come in. So when you start off, you're going to start off with this no environment. And all that is it's an environment way to set different variables that you have access to yourself. So if I click on this I will see that I have an environment and there's no active environment and I can click add. Adding this is going to allow me to create an environment. And so I've got two environments already keyed up. I've got demo keys and auth keys. I'll tell you right now, auth keys contain the actual authorization keys. But for demo purposes, we're going to take a look at this. So if I click on the I again, we can see that I have this demo keys environment set up with variables. So I have this one OMDB key. My initial value is not my real key and the current value is not my real key. We'll get to the ZA's items later, but for now, like I just need to know this variable name because what this is going to allow me to do is it is going to allow me to place a variable in the value so that I don't need to share that with you. So what I can do in order to call a variable is I go curly brace, and you'll see there's a form of auto complete, and I happen to know it's called OMDB. And once I do that, it recommends this key and it shows me the initial and the current and the scope. So I click on that and it fills it in. If I hover over it, I can see what the initial and what the current is. And that's great. So I now have the ability to go ahead and fill in the rest of what I'm looking for. So we said that we wanted to look at, again, looking back here, we want to look for a search. We're going to use the S, the T, the movie, and then the year. We'll go ahead and say 2005. So for I'm going to say S equals Lord of. We'll say YEAR equals 2005. Actually, no, that's just Y. And then we will say type equals movie. So as I typed all of that in, we can see here that it's got my API key and then it just filled in my entire query string. So API key and search for Lord of and Y equals 2005 and type equals movie. Perfect. We'll send that. And it didn't like it. It didn't like the fact that I sent an API key that was invalid. The reason it didn't like it is because I haven't changed over the environment. All I have to do is change the environment to the right environment that has my actual API key and click the send button. And as I do that, it goes ahead and it substitutes the data for what I had requested, and it shows me all the responses. So we've got Lord of War 2005, we've got Ringers, Lord of the Fans 2005. It also has links to the poster. They're all movies. And so I can scroll through this and I can see all the data that came back. Again, it's JSON. So let's say that we want, we don't want JSON. I screwed up. I don't want JSON. We just need to remember that it's R. So R is XML. And we'll add the key R XML and validate that it's all there. Yep, send it across. And now I get the data back that I had expected. I got a little warning. That warning was just letting me know that I'm reaching some limits on my shared account. I'm not worrying about that right now. But now I've got my data back as XML. Postman's recognized as XML. This is fantastic. Now, what if we need to authenticate using a username and password? Well, we've got an API that will help demonstrate that. So if we look back here at our API, we've got this Zerto Analytics API. Now this is a private API, again written in the Open API spec. slightly different information, but this one requires authentication. So shows me my endpoint here, shows me my auth and my token, um, or my auth token parameter, and it's actually, this is a post request. So we're actually sending data into the API this time, and it's expecting the data in this format. Username with the username, and then the password with the password. All right, but what else can we do? Well, let's look at events. So down here we have the events, and if I attempt to try this out right now without authenticating, and I just go ahead and leave everything in the default and I click execute, we're going to get this response 401 unauthorized, right? We have this general authorization error. So I can't do anything. I'm not authorized. Okay. So I come back here and I look at my authorization, and what we're expecting is to get back is this is using the bearer type of JWT token. So what we'll get back here is my bearer JWT token. Perfect. So if I look back here at my Postman authentication one, I need a body, and we're going to use my demo keys again, but I need to actually send a body. So we've changed the type to post over here, and we click on body here. And what is going to happen is that we are again using variables. Now these won't resolve right now just due to the fact that um, they're in quoted strings, but they will resolve when I send them. So I create the body, I create it as a raw type, and I specify that this is going to be JSON. So it knows how to analyze it. And I can actually copy right from that Swagger interface into here. I've already got it built, so it's fine. And at this point, if I send this, it's going to not authorize. So we'll go ahead and we'll send it. And authentication failed. I got that authentication failed. Just again, I got my status 401. And then you'll also notice that I have some test results here. And I have the test results because I want to extract that key that it is going to send us. And I need to use it. So my tests, if you look at them, I wrote a few tests. And I didn't write this test. Let me show you how I wrote this test. Is I selected a new line and status code's 200. Well, we know 200 is good. So over here, I've got some snippets and I can learn more about them, or I can just say, hey, status code is 200. Oh, fantastic, right? So first one is it a 200? Yes or no? And so that's the first test. That's what's running up here. And then I did a little bit of research and I found out that I can get the data back in a JSON format and I can set the token. So how do I set the token? Once again, I've got the data over here. So where is it? It is response. Nope, it's up here. Set an environment variable. That's what I'm looking for. So I click on that, and this tells me how to set the environment variable. I want to set something called ZA token and then JSON data.token. I'm extracting that out. Now, if you don't understand that right now, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Just understand that this is a possibility to help you automate some of the things that you might be trying to do. I've got that written in here. So if I look at those keys, it's going to add it in there. So once I have all of that set up, I change my environment to the auth. So we're going to pass my real username and password. We're going to send that, and the data that comes back is this token. Now, so you guys all know this is pre-recorded. This token will be expired by the time that you are looking at this. So I'm not worried about you guys trying to use this token. But this token now has been placed as part of my auth keys as that token name ZA tokens. So I'm now authenticated. But how do I use this token, right? How does Postman allow me to actually leverage this token to look at what we're doing? Well, it's this authorization field. So what I did is I went to Zerto Analytics. I looked at this events. I want to look up events, certain events in my history. Gives me all my query strings, but mainly I just copied this endpoint. That's perfect. Now, what happens? So what I've done now is I've decided that I'm using bearer token authentication as reported to me and as told to me by the documents. And I am using this ZA token that is the token. Actually, if we hover over it, it is that token that we've already set. So it shows me that current, which is perfect. Uh, Not setting any headers, but if I had headers to set, I could set them here. It doesn't require any special headers. And no body, we're not sending any body, but if I did have params, I could send them there. And if I click send now, we go out there and we get a whole bunch of identifiers returned back. And now you can play with this as you wish. So now it is using that authorization in order to send that data. So it's all well and good playing with all of this information within Postman. But the last thing that I want to show you is eventually you might need to export this to a script. You might need to do something more with the data. At that, Postman makes it really, really easy to export this and translate it into code. They've got this really cool button over here that says code. You can click on that, and what that does is that allows you to export the data, just as it is here, into a code snippet that you can use in your favorite language. And it supports a lot of different languages. So this one happens to be in Python requests. I love PowerShell. This is the PowerShell method of doing this methodology. If you are a JavaScript person, you can look at it in JavaScript, C Sharp, curl, go native, it's up to you. And once you've done that, this button here will copy it out, and then you can paste it into whatever you want. With that, that concludes the demo portion of this. I appreciate you guys taking the time with us today. I hope you learned something. Feel free to reach out and connect with me. More than happy to answer questions like this on Twitter, on LinkedIn, whatever works best for you guys. Hope you all have a great day.